Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I like to pick up on a few things as reported by those close to Johnson on the nature of his finances, his attitude to lying, and why the entitled perception that Boris Johnson has towards financial affairs is shaping up to be a disaster for the country. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So, going to be discussing, amongst other things here, the Boris Johnson scandal of the current time, again, what would ordinarily be the mundane affair of redecorating a flat that is opening a whole can of worms for the Conservatives. But I'd like to move on from what should be the unacceptable levels of corruption highlighted by Boris Johnson scrounging money from Tory donors to do up his flat and focus on how the very attitude that led him to do it is going to make a mess of our country's finances. So let's look at some of the comments that the Sunday Times, which is behind a paywall, it's one of those things, if you can read it, you've probably already read it, but was reporting this weekend from sources close to the Prime Minister, both personally and professionally. So the paper reported that the £30,000 that the Prime Minister is permitted to decorate was not enough for his and his fiancée's expensive taste. Conservatives around the country collectively face-palmed when the news got out about how they considered the John Lewis furnishings were basically a representation of squalor. There are Conservative supporters, Conservative voters, who would love to have their home kitted out with John Lewis furnishings. They could easily redecorate their entire house with a budget of £30,000, never mind just a flat, and a very nice job it would be too. But that amount was barely a third of what Boris Johnson needed to simply not be living in squalor. And the very furniture that many of his supporters would aspire to owning was a nightmare. Between the Prime Minister and his fiancée, who is now being called Carrie Antoinette, they have basically described the tastes of their voters as a nightmare. She works in PR, for goodness sake. But then look what happened. See, Boris Johnson, a wealthy man, was told he'd need another £58,000 to be able to afford his redecoration. It's like, you can have £30,000 of public money, but you're going to need another £58,000 for your expensive taste, Prime Minister. Now, he has now covered that cost, as he keeps telling us, meaning he could easily afford to do so. So he doesn't get to claim poverty. But he didn't. He scrounged the money from a Tory donor, likely Lord Brownlow, according to reports, a man who has donated to the upper echelons of the Conservative Party for years and benefited from £120 million worth of government contracts in return. Now let's break this process down. Boris Johnson was given £30,000 of public money. That's fine, all standard procedure. Now that wasn't enough for him. Now here's the first point. It is enough. Even for someone as posh as Boris Johnson, £30,000 is enough to redecorate a flat in a manner that anyone would be happy with. It might not be the decor of your dreams, but it will be pleasing to your tastes. The first part of the process shows that Johnson has no sense of value. No sense of making the best of limited funds. We had a situation where he was told he can have £30,000, which is enough. He decides he wants more, but he's not willing to pay more himself. So what would a sensible person do? They just go, right, well, let's see what we can do for £30,000. I don't want to pay any of my own personal money into it. What can we do with 30,000? But he didn't, you know. Now, he's the Prime Minister. He is the head of a government who is tasked with rectifying the intense economic damage of Tory austerity, Tory Brexit, and Tory pandemic. Two of those things were completely invented by the Tories. And the third, although started off not their fault, was made much, much worse than in any comparable country by the Tories. Johnson is supposed to be levelling up the country with an economy that he and his Conservative colleagues have knackered. Is someone who can't even redecorate a flat for £30,000. His level of budgeting ability is so poor that he cannot even manage to redecorate a flat on a budget of £30,000 Is this the sort of person who is going to make the right decisions in terms of levelling up the country, redecorating the country? I mean, yes, I know that the Chancellor Rishi Sunak organises the budget, but it will be according to Boris Johnson's policy wishes. Boris Johnson has set himself out as someone who wants what he wants, no expense spared. Then we come on to the second part of the process. Boris Johnson needs 3 times as much as he has. Does he examine his finances and work out how to afford it? You know, how to cut costs, bring it into budget? No, not even for a second. Not that it would change the picture fundamentally if he did. He's a very wealthy individual. He could have afforded to just pay the extra himself. According to the same Times article, friends of the Prime Minister are once again saying that he is complaining that he needs double the Prime Ministerial salary in order to just keep his head above water. But more of that on the next point. For now, what it is he did, he decided he was going to have that. He was going to have that money. He wasn't going to pay for it himself. So he just told someone else to find the money. In this case, a Tory donor. But what will it be for national investment? You can't go to the Tory donor and say, I need an extra 100 billion quid. I mean, they'll give him a few tens of thousands because they get a good return on that. They're not going to bankroll the country. So apply this same attitude to managing government spending. Boris Johnson has boasted of his plans to level up the country. A year and a half after the ill-fated election that propelled him to such power, we still haven't seen those plans. When he finally starts to discuss the details, which he presumably will have to at some point if he has any hope of retaining the red wall seats in 2024, people will tell him that he needs to scale down his plans or scale up his tax regime. But look at how he dealt with the flat. Boris Johnson has such a finely tuned sense of entitlement that he doesn't accept that anything can be over budget. A thing costs what a thing costs, and if he wants that thing, he expects to have it. The detail of how to pay for it is someone else's problem. We saw this in the budget earlier didn't we? The last budget. Boris Johnson insisted that his spending plans continue unabated. We'll need to put up taxes to pay for it, Sunak countered. No, we won't raise taxes and we won't scale back spending. And that's what the budget was. Except it wasn't really a budget because the figures aren't adding up. It is a Boris Johnson budget. It insists that we will be paying for loads of expensive, very shiny things, but it doesn't say how it will be paid for. Sunak reluctantly went along with it, muttering under his breath that it will have to be paid for at some point. That's what he said when he announced his budget. This will have to be paid for at some point. He's hinted at tax rises for the future. And this will continue for as long as Johnson is Prime Minister. The man who trashed Corbyn's spending plans as needing magic money trees is spending way more than Corbyn planned to with much less in return. We've known for some time from those who work with Johnson that the Prime Minister sees himself as the visionary who comes up with wonderful schemes. But he has no interest in detail. He expects others to come up with the plan for making his brain farts reality, and anyone who objects, to the lack of reality in his visions is dismissed as a naysayer. Literally, he has now jammed central government with vacuous toadies who don't even try to say no to the Prime Minister and wouldn't get anywhere if they tried. Then we come on to his attitude to income. So, it's been reported, as I say, off the record by friends at several points last year that Boris Johnson considered himself broke on a prime ministerial salary of about £150,000 a year. That is about 5 times the national average. When he gets free board as head of government, he gets a free house in central London, chauffeur-driven cars, a grace and favour house in the country, and all on the taxpayer's bill. Even then, he can't manage on 5 times the annual salary of average workers who get none of their bills paid for them. In fact, this latest report quotes friends as saying he needs £300,000 a year just to keep his head above water. Goodness only knows what he thinks he needs a year to do more than simply exist. The most striking example yet of having no sense of value and no sense for budgeting. This is a man who cannot manage on £150,000 a year, he says. This is a man who thinks he could only just scrape by on £300,000 a year. It's also a man who inherited an economy knackered by Tory austerity. Our economy was on its knees, but absolutely recoverable. He then proceeded to break its legs with Brexit, meaning that even a competent, honest government would need a generation to put things right. He's now proceeded to cave its skull in with a devastatingly appalling response to the pandemic. And that's not just because we've churned out billions in corrupt PPE contracts, but such was the weakness of the measures against the virus that long COVID is now going to cripple our workforce, especially in healthcare and education. For years, maybe even decades, we don't know. This will also saddle future governments with a millstone around their necks when they try to reverse the economic damage of these mad times. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. I hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, please also click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.